Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. Now just recently, we posted a video about how you can go out in nature and look at where different plant species are growing. We looked at some lomandra and some carex, and look at where they're growing and get an indication of what might work or what might not work in bioretention systems. Well, today we're continuing on that same sort of theme, and we're out here at the Nathan campus of Griffith Uni in Brisbane, and behind me we've got a little creek, and this is a spot where in the past, where I've been fortunate enough to do some guest lectures out here, I've often brought the students down to, because it is a really good indication of that sort of thing. You can wander down into the creek, you can see how the vegetation changes, you can see how the species change, and you can start to get a feel for what plants might work in bioretention, what might not, and so forth. So the thing we know about bioretention is that it is, despite the fact that at certain times it can get lots of water, for the majority of the year, it's actually really dry, right? In between rainfall events, it drains out pretty quickly and is pretty dry. And then you get these occasional wet periods. So in a spot like this, where there's, this path running down into the creek, we can see this change in vegetation. We can pick species that we see more commonly and not commonly and get a feeling for kind of where the vegetation that's in the bioretention matches up with the vegetation in the creek, and then get some other ideas of what else might work, right? So we're going to take a walk down in there. So first up, we're fairly high up on the bank here, and we're in a relatively dry zone, right? There's a few things that we see kicking around in here. There are some lomandras. Now, admittedly, this lomandra was probably planted here as part of the landscaping, because you can see a whole bunch of them back up the path, fringing the path on either side just there. There's a whole bunch of them, right? But there are also some lomandras in this drier section out throughout the bush, and so on. There are, where is one? There's a couple of melaleuca trees up this high. So this paperbark, I'll jump up in here. This paperbark up in here, we see melaleucas quite a bit in bioretention. So we've got a few species that we recognise, and we're in this kind of drier zone. So what we'll do, we'll take a walk down into the system and we'll see how it changes. So as we wander down, we can continue to spot a few things. There's a melaleuca, not a melaleuca, a lomandra on the left there. Sorry, we get some viney species. We then start to get a few more melaleucas. So we're probably, looking back up the path, we're probably about 1.5 meters lower than where I was initially standing by now. And we're starting to get a few more melaleucas, these paperbarks coming in here. There's still some lomandras beside the path, although again, I think those are planted with the landscaping, but I can see some a fair way into the bush there. Coming further down, some more melaleucas, and here we get a change. I'll run down. Are those Dianellas in there? I think they are. You just stay here, Ben. I'll run down and just point these out. I believe that is a Dianella. Yeah, okay, it is. It's got a purple berry. So these growing in here, these are Dianellas. We sometimes see those popping up in bioretention, and so on. We got these paperbarks. So coming back out here, so we've seen a little bit of a change happen at this point here, where we're now about probably 2 meters lower than where we started. And we'll keep wandering back in. And then this is where the real change happens, right here. Firstly, I just felt it get cooler as we walked that last meter or so, and the base of the creek bed starts to flatten out here, and we get a real change in species. There are lots more melaleucas here. We have got still some more Dianellas running down in the base, and over in here, there is the odd lomandra. There's a lomandra over here that we'll go have a look at in a second. But then at the base just here, we start to pick up these kind of these ferny species like so. And this plant over here, which now we're not 100% sure what this is. We think it is a form of carex. It's not Carex oppressor that you see regularly in bioretention, but we think it is a carex of some sort. It doesn't really matter if it's not, because we can still talk this through. But we get this species coming up a lot in the system here. And this is the change, right? So just over there is where the little creek runs through here. Now, when it's raining, it'll run, but then it kind of dries back into these kind of ephemeral nature, these isolated ponds. But we've got this change in the hydrology here. So we've got these plants that once we get down into the flat base of the system, that we see them really regularly. And that I believe, is because we've got these species here that like a little bit more moisture. My observation of carex, and let's assume this is carex, I could be wrong, is that they don't like their stems being in water, but they do like their roots getting down into the groundwater for sure. And so we can look around here and go, okay, these species here really want a little bit more water than higher up the bank, which is more like a bioretention. We said at the start of this video that bioretention is primarily dry and occasionally very wet. Well, down here, we're looking at occasionally very wet, normally still quite moist, particularly in the subsoil, and then probably very rarely dry. So this probably isn't as an ideal species for a bioretention system, right? Because this is probably going to want more water than the bioretention can provide. Something like a Lomandra, however, or a Melaleuca, let's talk Melaleuca, however, could work quite well. So we see down here, we've got lots of these paper barks growing, right? So obviously they can tolerate being really wet occasionally. They seem quite happy with their roots down into lots of water, but we still saw some of them back up the bank in the really dry sections. So that indicates that there's some tolerance with this species, right? So that says to me, okay, we've got a really quite an adaptable species here. And when I think about where I see Melaleucas, because they get planted also like around the street, certain streets of Brisbane and stuff as landscaping, they'll grow in really quite dry environments there. So by observing where this species grows in nature, I get a little bit of confidence that this is going to adapt quite well into bioretention. And in fact, we see that, right? The oldest bioretention system in Brisbane is the Hoyland Street system, and Melaleucas, in that case it was Melaleuca quinquenervia, which I think this is, but I could be wrong. Melaleuca quinquenervia was one of the key species planted in that bioretention basin, and it's now 15 years old, and it stood the test of time. So, you're beginning to get the picture here of, obviously I've talked about a couple of specific species here, but you can apply this more generally, right? You can come out to a bushland area. It's great if you've got this path that walks down in so you can clearly see the transition as it happens. But you can come out to this sort of area and look around and go, oh, okay, that's sort of, you know, we don't want anything perhaps that's right down on the creek, but the stuff that's a little bit up the bank, okay, that might work, and you can get a feel for what will work, and you can go back to the office, see what's available from nurseries and so on. One more thing before we finish this up that I do want to show you, we'll jump back up to the path and we'll just point out something else that this particular location is really good for. And we'll forgive Ben if this video gets a little wobbly because I'm making him wander all over the place. What we wanted to show you here, so the side that we were just standing on over there is the upstream side. So we can see lots of, again, like the Melaleucas and the carex kind of branching out, you know, a number of meters away from the center line of the creek, right? Which tends to suggest there's a bit of moisture for a fair while. But we flip over to the other side here, because the creek runs through a pipe just underneath the walkway here. And you can see it's really quite different on this side here. It's much drier. Oh, do you want to grab, show us the water dragon. These things are everywhere around here. They're awesome. On this side, yeah, there are some of these carex and there are some Melaleucas, but there's way fewer than them. And this is a really good example of how the walkway here is changing the hydrology on either side. The pipe's relatively small here, and so if you come down here in a big storm, you'll see water is really backing up on the upstream side and spreads out, so there's a lot more water available to the plants on the upstream side. And then you flip down to the downstream side, there's much less water available, and you have the change in hydrology. Now, I suppose that's a little bit less applicable to bioretention systems and more just an observation of what's going on in nature. But I wanted to share that with you because I think it's a fairly good, this is a fairly good example of it. Sweet. So that's it for this episode. We have looked at, I suppose, what we can learn again by going out into nature, seeing how the plants vary as we walk down into a bushland area near a creek, and seeing how we can take some learnings from that sort of thing and go, okay, what will work in a bioretention system? Actually, I'm really surprised, just completely off topic for a minute, I'm really surprised that Ben didn't flinch then because I said learnings and he hates the word learnings. We've had some interesting discussions there. But anyway, that's an aside. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Ideanthro. If you want to know more about what it is that we do, you can find us online at www.ideanthro.com. We also have a Facebook page. Obviously, we have a YouTube channel because that's presumably how you're watching this video. So you can check out all of that stuff, find out more about what it is that we do. Okay, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.